In the world of hip-hop, power and personality often clash louder than the beats themselves. And few stories have captured that collision more vividly than the one between Nicki Minaj and Cardi B, two women who redefined what it means to be a female rapper, yet found themselves locked in one of the most publicized rivalries in modern music. Their paths were different, their journeys unique, but destiny, fame, and pressure pushed them into the same orbit. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about feuds in entertainment history. Before the world saw headlines of chaos and confrontation, there were years of hard work, hustle, and dreams. Nicki Minaj's story began long before she became a global icon. Born in Trinidad and raised in Queens, New York, Nicki built her career from the underground up. Her early mixtapes earned her recognition for sharp lyrics, bold visuals, and a fierce sense of individuality. She wasn't just another rapper, she was a performer, a storyteller, a visionary. By the early 2010s, Nicki Minaj had become one of the biggest names in music, dominating charts and red carpets with her signature mix of style and strength. For nearly a decade, she stood at the top, representing female rap in a space that had often excluded women. She was bold, unapologetic, and intensely aware of how hard she had fought to be there. Cardi B's story, on the other hand, began in the digital era. Born and raised in the Bronx, Cardi was loud, funny, and unfiltered, a personality made for the age of social media. She first gained attention online for her humor and confidence, speaking her truth without fear of judgment. But what many underestimated was her determination. Behind the humor was a woman with drive, vision, and the ability to connect with people on a real level. Her breakout moment came through Love and Hip Hop, New York, where her charisma turned her into a fan favorite. When she decided to pursue music seriously, few believed she could rise to Nicki Minaj's level. But Cardi had something different, raw energy and a voice that people couldn't ignore. When Cardi released Bodak Yellow in 2017, the world stopped and listened. The song became a phenomenon, shooting straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, a position no solo female rapper had held in nearly 2 decades. The success was explosive, and almost immediately comparisons began. Every headline, every interview, every fan discussion started framing Cardi as the new queen, the one who could challenge Nicki's throne. The media began building a rivalry long before either artist addressed it. In the entertainment world, two powerful women succeeding at the same time was often treated like a competition, not a celebration. At first, both Nicki and Cardi appeared to show respect for each other publicly. Nicki congratulated Cardi on her success, and Cardi often acknowledged Nicki's influence in paving the way for female rappers. For a moment, it seemed like this could be a story of sisterhood in hip-hop, two women winning together. But underneath the smiles, tension was building. The pressure of constant comparison and online commentary began to twist admiration into suspicion. Fans and bloggers picked apart every move, every lyric, every tweet, trying to prove there was more going on. Nicki Minaj was in a complex position. She had worked for years to dominate a space that had often been hostile to women. Her success wasn't given, she had to demand it. And now, as Cardi's fame skyrocketed, Nicki's every word and action were being reinterpreted as competitive or defensive. For Cardi, the sudden fame came with overwhelming expectations. She was being compared to someone she grew up listening to, someone she had once admired. But instead of being celebrated for her individuality, she was constantly asked how she felt about Nicki. The narrative was no longer about their music, it was about their supposed rivalry. Things began to shift when both artists appeared on the same track, Motorsport, alongside Migos. What should have been a powerful collaboration between two of the biggest female rappers in the world quickly turned into a symbol of their tension. Fans noticed differences between the verses, tone, and even small changes in lyrics. Online speculation exploded. Was there shade in Nicki's verse? Was Cardi ignoring her during the video shoot? Every rumor added fuel to a fire neither artist had publicly confirmed. When Nicki later spoke in interviews, she expressed frustration, not necessarily at Cardi, but at how the situation was handled. She explained that her verse was altered and that she felt disrespected by the way things were portrayed. Cardi, on her end, claimed she had no issue with Nicki personally, but was tired of the constant comparison. Yet the internet had already decided the two women were rivals. Social media turned the tension into a spectacle, amplifying every minor moment into major controversy. As the months went by, subtle comments and reactions kept the story alive. Fans dissected song lyrics, award show reactions, and red carpet interviews for hidden meaning. At one point, Nicki seemed to express disappointment at the lack of respect she felt she deserved as a pioneer, while Cardi made it clear that she was focused on enjoying her success and staying real. The problem was that every sentence either of them spoke was immediately framed as a jab at the other. The cycle was endless and exhausting. Behind the scenes, industry politics only made things worse. Music executives, radio hosts, and social media influencers all had something to gain from the ongoing tension. Drama brought attention, and attention meant numbers. Rumors began to spread that the two were intentionally being pitted against each other by people within the industry. It wasn't just about personal dislike anymore. It was about business, branding, and public perception. As 2018 arrived, the energy between Nicki and Cardi had shifted from cautious respect to open discomfort. They attended the same events, performed on the same stages, but always with a layer of tension in the air. Fans would zoom in on every camera angle, searching for signs, a side eye, a reaction, a smirk. Both women, aware of how they were being watched, often kept their composure. But the pressure was undeniable. It was as if the world was waiting for something to happen. And in September 2018, it finally did. During New York Fashion Week, both artists attended a high-profile event. The air was electric, cameras flashing, celebrities mingling, energy at its peak. What began as a glamorous evening quickly turned into chaos when reports surfaced that Nicki and Cardi had an altercation. Videos circulated online showing security guards intervening, Cardi shouting, and the crowd reacting in shock. Within hours, the incident had gone viral. Headlines described it as a fight, though the details were blurred. The internet exploded with speculation. Cardi later posted on Instagram, expressing frustration about people allegedly talking about her child and family. Nicki, on her radio show, denied the accusations and emphasized that she would never insult another woman's child. The entire situation became a media frenzy. Clips replayed, statements analyzed, and fans divided into two camps: Team Nicki and Team Cardi. What should have been a private disagreement turned into a public war, magnified by millions of voices online. But even in that chaos, one thing was clear. Both women were products of immense pressure. Nicki had spent years fighting for her place in a male-dominated industry. Cardi had exploded into fame almost overnight and was struggling to navigate that world. Their clash wasn't just about words or pride. It was about identity, survival, and how women in hip-hop are often forced into competition. By the end of that year, both Nicki and Cardi had spoken about wanting peace, but the damage had been done. Their relationship, once filled with potential for unity, had turned into a symbol of how the industry can twist success stories into rivalries. The fight wasn't just between two artists. It was a reflection of how fame, expectation, and narrative can collide until there's no turning back. Yet beneath the headlines, there was still a strange kind of respect, an acknowledgement that both had achieved what few could. They had made history, broken records, and brought female rap to new heights. But their journeys, once parallel, had now split in two very different directions. And as the world continued to debate who was right or wrong, one truth began to surface. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of something much bigger, a lesson in fame, power, and how even the strongest personalities can be shaped by the forces around them. When the world woke up the morning after New York Fashion Week, the internet was already on fire. Headlines, memes, and shaky cell phone videos dominated every social media feed. The story wasn't about the event anymore. It was about Nicki Minaj and Cardi B. What had started as whispers of tension over the years had erupted into something visible, tangible, and impossible to ignore. The sight of Cardi shouting while being held back by security, with Nicki standing calm yet distant in the background, became an instant cultural snapshot, one that would define how their relationship was perceived for years to come. The world wanted answers. Fans demanded explanations, and the media couldn't get enough. Within hours, rumors began circulating about what had been said, who started it, and what had led to the moment. Some claimed that it began over a song feature, others suggested it was personal comments about family, but no one really knew the full truth. Both women had their sides of the story, and both had millions of supporters ready to defend them. Cardi was the first to speak publicly, taking to Instagram with a statement that hinted at what had pushed her to react. She wrote about being disrespected, about lies being spread, and about protecting her family. Her post didn't name Nicki directly, but everyone understood who it was aimed at. The caption was raw, emotional, and unapologetic, exactly what fans had come to expect from Cardi. She wasn't trying to be diplomatic. She was expressing how she felt in real time. Nicki, in contrast, responded with composure. On her radio show, Queen Radio, she addressed the incident in her own way, calm but firm. She denied ever speaking about Cardi's child or family, saying that she would never cross that line. She called the altercation mortifying and said she wanted no part in that kind of drama. Her tone was measured, almost disappointed, as if she couldn't believe how far things had gone. But even as she tried to set the record straight, the internet continued to twist and remix her words. For weeks, both artists became the center of a cultural storm. Talk shows debated who was right and who was wrong. Commentators turned their rivalry into a social experiment about women in the music industry. The phrase Nicki versus Cardi became a brand in itself, a headline magnet. Every tweet, every appearance, every song was dissected for hidden messages. It was no longer just about music. It was about personality, pride, and perception. Fans, too, took sides fiercely. The Barbs, Nicki's loyal fan base, defended her with unmatched energy, emphasizing how long she had worked to build her empire and how unfair it was that people were painting her as a villain. The Bardi gang, Cardi's passionate supporters, stood by her equally fiercely, framing her as the underdog standing up for herself against the establishment. The battle lines were drawn across social media. Every post became a new chapter in an ongoing digital war, full of screenshots, quotes, and endless debates. Behind the noise, both artists continued to work. Cardi was still enjoying massive success from her debut album, Invasion of Privacy, which had won critical acclaim and a Grammy for Best Rap Album, a historic win that marked her as the first solo female rapper to take that award. Nicki, meanwhile, was promoting her Queen album, which had debuted at number 2 but received praise for its lyrical depth and emotional intensity. Their careers, in many ways, were both peaking, but instead of being celebrated together, they were being contrasted endlessly. In interviews following the incident, both tried to move forward. Cardi emphasized that she wanted peace, saying she didn't have time for negativity because she was focused on her family and her career. Nicki echoed a similar sentiment, saying she wished Cardi the best but wanted to focus on her own music. Yet despite those statements, the world didn't want peace. It wanted more conflict. Every song verse, every award show appearance, every red carpet glance was analyzed as potential shade. There was a moment when both artists seemed to call a truce publicly. After weeks of online back and forth, Cardi posted on Instagram that the argument was over, writing that it was time to move on. Nicki retweeted the sentiment, agreeing that the drama had gone too far and that it was time for both fan bases to stop fueling the fire. For a brief moment, it looked like the feud had ended. But like most things in the digital age, peace didn't last long. The issue wasn't just between Nicki and Cardi anymore. It had become part of the culture. Every time one of them released a new project, the other's name was mentioned. Every achievement was compared. It was as if their legacies were tied together by the conflict, no matter how much they tried to separate themselves. The media had found its narrative. 2 queens in one kingdom fighting for the crown. The truth, though, was more complex. Both Nicki and Cardi were products of entirely different eras in hip-hop. Nicki came from a time when breaking into the industry as a woman meant out-rapping men, outdressing them, and outworking them just to get noticed. Cardi came from a time when authenticity and relatability were power, when fans wanted to see the real person behind the fame. Their approaches weren't wrong. They were just different, but the world wasn't ready to celebrate both. It wanted competition, not coexistence. Privately, those close to both women described the toll the feud had taken. Nicki, known for her sharp confidence, had moments where she felt unfairly targeted, where years of hard work were being dismissed because of new narratives. Cardi, known for her openness, struggled with being misunderstood, with being portrayed as angry or aggressive when she felt she was simply defending herself. Fame magnified their emotions and the internet fed off of it. What many people forget is that both women were dealing with immense pressure outside of their feud. Nicki was navigating a changing music landscape, one that now valued virality as much as lyricism. Cardi was learning how to handle fame, motherhood, and criticism all at once. Their fight wasn't just personal. It was symbolic of two different generations of artists colliding under the bright lights of modern celebrity. As 2019 unfolded, the tension began to settle, but the aftershocks lingered. Both artists avoided mentioning each other publicly, focusing instead on their own work. Nicki released new collaborations, continued to headline festivals, and eventually announced a brief retirement from music to focus on her personal life, a move that surprised fans but also showed her desire for peace. Cardi, meanwhile, continued releasing hits, appearing on award stages and establishing herself as a dominant force in both rap and pop culture. The incident at New York Fashion Week had left a scar on both of their careers, but it had also changed the conversation around women in rap. For years, the industry had operated on the idea that there could only be one female rapper at the top at a time. The Nicki and Cardi feud forced that notion into the spotlight, making people question why women were constantly pitted against each other when male artists could coexist without the same scrutiny. It was a painful lesson, but an important one. By 2020, the two artists had moved so far apart musically and personally that the tension no longer defined them. Nicki became a mother, focusing more on her family while still maintaining her influence as a legend in hip-hop. Cardi continued to dominate charts with her hits, collaborations, and outspoken personality. Both women, despite everything, had survived the storm, and in doing so, they had changed the landscape of hip-hop forever. But even as time passed, fans never forgot. Old clips resurfaced, interviews were reanalyzed, and every time one of them dropped new music, comparisons returned. The rivalry had become more than a feud. It was a part of their shared history, something neither could fully escape. Yet it also showed their resilience. Both had been through the kind of public scrutiny that could destroy careers, and yet both were still standing, still thriving, still commanding the world's attention. In the end, the aftermath of that fight said more about the world than it did about them. It exposed how the industry and the public feed on drama, how narratives are built and twisted, and how two incredibly talented women became symbols of something much bigger than themselves. It wasn't just about anger or competition. It was about identity, power, and survival in an industry that loves conflict as much as it loves success. And while both Nicki Minaj and Cardi B moved on in their own ways, the question remained, did the world learn anything from what happened between them? Or was it destined to repeat the same pattern with the next generation of stars? Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of conflict. As the years passed after their explosive confrontation, both Nicki Minaj and Cardi B began to redefine their stories, each taking a separate path toward personal and professional evolution. What had once been a constant source of tension started to fade into history, not because the world forgot, but because both women gave it less power. For Nicki Minaj, rebuilding her image wasn't about apology or retreat. It was about reminding the world why she had become such a force in the first place. She had always thrived on reinvention. After years of setting records, breaking barriers, and dominating the charts, she now focused on legacy, how she wanted to be remembered beyond the headlines. She took control of her narrative, using her platform to remind people that before there was a Cardi B, or even before there was a new generation of female rappers, there was Nicki Minaj blazing the trail. Nicki had entered an industry that wasn't built for her. She had carved a space for herself through sheer determination, talent, and vision. Every wig, every persona, every verse had been part of a larger performance, one that challenged what it meant to be a woman in hip-hop. When the feud with Cardi happened, it felt like the world had forgotten her contributions, reducing her to a meme or a headline. So she responded in the only way she knew how, through the music. Her collaborations in the following years showed a softer, more reflective side. Songs like Megatron and her features on global hits kept her name at the top of the charts, but her interviews revealed something deeper. She spoke openly about growth, about being misunderstood, and about learning how to balance fame with personal peace. She also became more selective, appearing less frequently in public, curating her social media presence and focusing on her personal life, including marriage and motherhood. Motherhood especially changed everything for Nicki. When she gave birth to her son in 2020, her priorities shifted dramatically. She shared glimpses of her life as a mother with fans, but she also kept much of it private. It wasn't about hiding. It was about protecting something sacred. For someone who had spent over a decade in the spotlight, it was a new kind of strength, a quieter kind. Fans began to see her not just as a rapper or icon, but as a human being navigating a new chapter. Cardi B's journey after the feud was equally transformative, but in her own unique way. Where Nicki's approach was measured and calculated, Cardi's was open and fearless. She leaned into her authenticity even more, embracing her unfiltered personality, her humor, and her vulnerability. Instead of distancing herself from the chaos of fame, she used it as fuel for creativity. Cardi's music continued to dominate, but what truly cemented her as a cultural powerhouse was her ability to connect. She didn't just rap about her life, she lived it publicly, inviting fans into her world. Whether she was discussing politics on Twitter, joking on Instagram Live, or sharing her experiences as a mother and wife, Cardi's transparency became her greatest weapon. People didn't just like her music, they related to her story. The release of WAP in 2020 was a turning point. The song featuring Megan Thee Stallion became a global phenomenon. It wasn't just provocative, it was powerful. It celebrated female sexuality, confidence, and ownership in a way that sparked conversation across the world. Some praised it, others criticized it, but everyone talked about it. For Cardi, it was another victory. Proof that she could thrive despite controversy, despite criticism, despite the weight of comparisons. What was most interesting about the post-feud years wasn't just their success. It was how both Nicki and Cardi began to influence others. Their feud had inadvertently opened doors for more women in hip-hop. Suddenly, the industry wasn't focused on there being just one female rapper at the top. A new wave emerged, and artists like Megan Thee Stallion, Doja Cat, Latto, and Saweetie began to flourish, each with her own style, sound, and audience. In interviews, both Nicki and Cardi acknowledged this shift in their own ways. Nicki, who had once felt isolated in her position as the only dominant woman in rap, expressed pride in seeing more female rappers succeed. She mentioned how the new generation reminded her of her own beginnings, the hunger, the creativity, the desire to break barriers. Cardi, meanwhile, often used her platform to uplift other women, collaborating with newcomers and reminding fans that there was room for everyone. Still, the shadow of their past rivalry lingered. The internet, ever nostalgic for drama, continued to compare their every move. If Nicki released a single, people would ask how it stacked up against Cardi's latest. If Cardi made headlines for an award or statement, Nicki's name would appear in the comments. It was as if the world refused to let them exist separately. Yet both women learned to ignore the noise, focusing instead on what truly mattered: their art, their families, and their peace. By 2021, the tone around both artists had matured. The media narrative had shifted from Nicki versus Cardi to Nicki and Cardi, two women who changed hip-hop forever. They had both proven their staying power. Their success was no longer just about hits. It was about influence. Nicki was being recognized as one of the greatest rappers, male or female, and of her generation. Cardi was being celebrated as one of the most relatable and fearless entertainers in the industry. Behind the scenes, industry insiders spoke of how much the two artists had learned from their experience. They had realized how quickly fame could twist friendships, and how easy it was for the public to pit people against each other. They had also learned that time and growth can change perspective. What once felt like a battle now looked like a lesson, one that had shaped them both into stronger, more self-aware individuals. Nicki's return to the charts in 2022 with new music reignited fan excitement. Her tracks reminded everyone of the lyrical precision and confidence that had made her a legend. She balanced that with moments of vulnerability, lyrics about self-reflection, fame, and the pressure of expectations. Fans who had followed her since Pink Friday could sense the evolution. This was a more grounded Nicki, still fierce, still sharp, but more centered. Cardi, on the other hand, continued expanding beyond music. She became a style icon, businesswoman, and cultural figure. Her collaborations with fashion brands, her outspoken nature, and her ability to blend humor with authenticity made her one of the most recognizable personalities in entertainment. She was no longer the new girl in the game. She was a global brand, respected and loved for her realness. Even as the years went on without a collaboration between them, many fans continued to hope for one. The idea of Nicki Minaj and Cardi B on the same track became almost mythical, a symbol of unity that could close a chapter in hip-hop history. Interviews, however, suggested that while there was no active animosity, both artists were simply focused on their own lanes. They had found peace not through reconciliation but through growth, and that in many ways was the real story. Not the fight, not the headlines, but the evolution that followed. Both women had walked through fire and come out stronger. They had faced the harshest kind of scrutiny and survived it. In a world that often tears women down, they had both refused to fall. As the industry continued to evolve, the influence of Nicki and Cardi became undeniable. You could hear traces of Nicki's wordplay and theatrical delivery in countless young rappers. You could see Cardi's boldness and confidence reflected in the new wave of artists unafraid to be themselves. Together, even unintentionally, they had reshaped what it meant to be a female rapper, from being a novelty to being a norm. By the time 2023 rolled around, both artists had entered what fans called their mature eras. Nicki, balancing motherhood and artistry, focused on mentorship and legacy projects. Cardi, now comfortable in her status, began working on her second album while taking more control over her business ventures. The energy that once fueled their feud had transformed into something more productive. Ambition without hostility, competition without conflict. Their journeys became case studies in resilience. The world had watched them clash, criticize, and grow, and in doing so had learned something about fame itself. The feud that once defined them had, in the end, reminded everyone that success doesn't come without struggle. It showed that even in the midst of chaos, reinvention is possible. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B may never become close friends, but they no longer need to be enemies. Both have built empires on their own terms, and their coexistence has proven that hip-hop, and the world, is big enough for more than one queen. As time moved forward, what began as a feud between two women became a reflection of something much larger, a shift in the entire culture of hip-hop and celebrity. The story of Nicki Minaj and Cardi B was no longer about a fight. It had become a mirror of the music industry's evolving identity, an exploration of fame, femininity, and how society views powerful women in the public eye. By the mid-2020s, both artists had built legacies too strong to be reduced to a single moment of conflict. Yet the echoes of their rivalry still shaped how the world talked about female artists. Journalists, scholars, and fans began to analyze their story not as simple drama, but as a cultural case study, one that revealed how women in power are often forced to compete rather than coexist. In the years that followed the feud, the hip-hop industry experienced one of its most diverse and dynamic periods ever. Women were no longer the exception. They were the movement. Dozens of new voices emerged, each bold, confident, and unapologetically unique. Megan Thee Stallion, Doja Cat, Ice Spice Latto, and countless others entered the mainstream, bringing fresh energy and perspectives. When asked about this wave of female talent, both Nicki and Cardi expressed pride. They had both played a part, whether consciously or not, in breaking barriers that once seemed impossible. Their visibility and success had proven that there was space for multiple women at the top, and that competition could exist without destruction. Nicki's influence on this new generation was particularly profound. Artists cited her as their blueprint, the one who made it possible to be glamorous and lyrical, fierce and feminine, commercial and authentic. Her style had redefined what rap could look like, merging fashion, performance, and wordplay into something theatrical and powerful. Even those who had grown up during her most controversial years acknowledged her impact. For Cardi, the influence came from her relatability. She had shown that you didn't have to come from the traditional mold to make it. You didn't have to hide your flaws, change your accent, or soften your personality. Her rise from reality television to rap superstardom was proof that talent could shine even in unexpected places. She represented the modern American dream, unfiltered, unpredictable, and absolutely fearless. Together, Nicki and Cardi had transformed what it meant to be a woman in hip-hop. Before them, female rappers were often pressured to fit into narrow boxes, too tough or too sexy, too lyrical or too mainstream. But Nicki and Cardi broke those rules. They proved that women could be multi-dimensional, that they could rap about money, heartbreak, empowerment, and sexuality, all in the same verse. But their story wasn't just about gender. It was also about the evolution of fame itself. Both women came up during different social media eras, and their feud exposed just how powerful online culture had become in shaping public perception. Nicki Minaj's rise happened in a time when Twitter and YouTube were tools for promotion, not battlefields. She used them to connect with fans and build her Barb's empire, one of the most passionate fan bases in music. But when controversy hit, that same platform became a double-edged sword. Every post, every emoji, every like was analyzed as a statement. Cardi B, on the other hand, was born from social media. Her early Instagram videos, full of humor and real talk, had catapulted her from anonymity to stardom. She understood the language of virality better than anyone, how to turn chaos into conversation and vulnerability into strength. Yet even she admitted over time that the same platforms that made her famous also became overwhelming. The pressure of constant attention, the criticism, the endless comparisons, it all took a toll. The feud between them was amplified not by music magazines or radio shows, but by millions of users online. It became one of the first major celebrity conflicts to play out entirely in the age of instant reactions. The internet didn't just report the story, it created it. Memes replaced facts. Fan theories became headlines. Narratives shifted with every tweet. This digital explosion changed how artists handled their public image. Both Nicki and Cardi eventually stepped back, learning the importance of silence in a world that demanded constant noise. They started choosing their battles more carefully, controlling their narratives through direct statements, and refusing to feed the online frenzy. Their journeys began to highlight a new reality of fame, that being visible came with emotional cost. The pressure to stay relevant, the fear of being misunderstood, the exhaustion of living under a microscope. These were burdens that both women had carried. And yet, they had both found ways to survive. Beyond music and fame, their influence spilled into social issues. Nicki Minaj had long been vocal about artistic control, calling out unfair treatment in the industry and advocating for creative independence. She reminded artists, especially women, to own their work, their masters, and their power. Cardi B, on the other hand, became a voice for working-class women and minorities. She spoke about politics, healthcare, and equality in her raw, straightforward style, earning respect from fans and critics alike. Both women, in their own ways, used their platforms to challenge stereotypes. They didn't fit into the neat categories that society expected. They were complex, contradictory, and unapologetically human. That was their greatest power. Culturally, their story also sparked conversations about how women are portrayed in media. Why was it that two men could disagree and be called competitive, but when two women did the same, it was a catfight? Why was female ambition often framed as hostility? These questions began to echo across entertainment, journalism, and fan discussions alike. Their rivalry forced audiences to confront their own biases, the subtle ways that the world treats powerful women differently. It wasn't lost on anyone that both Nicki and Cardi were women of color, navigating an industry that had often sidelined or tokenized them. Their success and their struggle became symbols of resilience against those double standards. By 2022, something interesting began happening. Younger fans, those who hadn't lived through the height of their feud, started viewing Nicki and Cardi not as enemies, but as icons from different eras. They saw Nicki as the legend who built the foundation, and Cardi as the disruptor who broke the mold. The fight had faded into folklore, a dramatic chapter in a much larger story of evolution. In interviews, both women reflected on their journeys with surprising calmness. Nicki spoke about legacy and the peace that came with maturity. Cardi talked about growth, family, and focusing on what really mattered. Neither erased the past, but neither let it define them anymore. Meanwhile, their impact continued to ripple outward. Music videos, fashion campaigns, award shows, everything bore traces of their influence. When artists like Megan Thee Stallion or Doja Cat performed on stage, you could feel the echoes of Nicki's theatrical flair and Cardi's fearless confidence. Their existence had made space for a new kind of freedom in artistry. One where women could be loud, stylish, sexual, serious, or silly, without apology. In many ways, they had accomplished something that few feuds ever achieve: transformation. Their conflict had forced an industry to evolve. It had opened eyes, sparked conversations, and inspired change. What was once seen as drama had become history, a cultural milestone in hip-hop's ongoing narrative. And yet, even as time healed old wounds, curiosity remained. Fans still wondered, what would it look like if Nicki Minaj and Cardi B ever came together on the same track? What if the two forces that once collided decided to unite? The thought alone was enough to set social media ablaze every time it surfaced. But maybe that was the beauty of their story. The fact that it kept people dreaming, discussing, and imagining. Their paths may never fully cross again, but they don't need to. Both women have already proven their worth, their staying power, and their individuality. Their coexistence itself is proof that evolution is possible, that two stars can shine without dimming each other's light. Looking back, the explosive fight that once dominated headlines now feels like just one moment in a far bigger legacy. A moment that, while intense, became the spark for growth. Without it, perhaps the world wouldn't have learned to question its narratives about women, power, and fame. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B didn't just survive their feud, they transcended it. And in doing so, they redefined what strength looks like in the spotlight. By the time the dust had truly settled, one thing became clear. The story of Nicki Minaj and Cardi B was never really about a fight. It was about two women standing at the intersection of talent, ambition, and power in an industry that often only made space for one. Their paths had collided in a way that set the world ablaze. But what came after was far more meaningful than the moment that started it all. As years passed, both women carved out places in history that could no longer be shaken by controversy. Their names became pillars in the evolution of modern hip-hop, not just as performers but as cultural icons who redefined what fame could mean for women of color. They didn't just make music. They shaped conversations, broke ceilings, and expanded what was possible for the generations that followed. Nicki Minaj's legacy by now was undeniable. With over a decade of chart-topping hits, world tours, and record-breaking achievements, she had transitioned from artist to architect. Every new female rapper who emerged carried a trace of her influence, the confidence in their flow, the experimentation in their style, the boldness in their image. She had shown that you could be both a lyricist and a pop star, both intelligent and glamorous, both fierce and feminine. Her fans, the Barbs, had become one of the most powerful online communities in entertainment, defending her legacy with the same fire she brought to her verses. But beyond the fame and fanfare, Nicki had grown into something more grounded. Motherhood and experience had changed her perspective. In interviews, she spoke less about competition and more about balance, artistry, and gratitude. She talked about the weight of being the first, how lonely that path could be, but also how proud she was to have walked it. She knew that her story had opened doors. There had been times when she felt misunderstood, even villainized, but looking back, she recognized the bigger picture. Every barrier she broke became an opportunity for someone else to walk through. Her presence had forced an industry to evolve, and she took pride in that. Cardi B's legacy, too, had grown beyond the charts. What started as a Cinderella story, a Bronx girl with a dream and a smartphone, had transformed into a testament of perseverance and authenticity. Cardi had become the embodiment of modern fame, real, raw, and unapologetic. She didn't change to fit the industry. She changed the industry to fit her. Her success wasn't just in her music, and it was in her influence. From politics to pop culture, Cardi's voice resonated in unexpected places. She could speak on government policies one day and joke about her daily life the next, and people listened. She represented the power of being genuine in a world obsessed with image. By 2024, Both women had entered a new phase of their careers. They no longer needed to prove who was bigger or better, because they had both already won. They had transcended rivalry and entered the realm of legacy. The media had moved on, the fans had matured, and the story that once divided audiences had become a shared memory of how far hip-hop had come. Yet every once in a while, the internet would spark with hope. A rumor here, a speculative tweet there, whispers of a possible Nicki Minaj and Cardi B collaboration. Fans imagined what it would sound like if the two most influential women of their generation came together on one track. The thought alone stirred nostalgia and excitement. But maybe that was the beauty of their story, that it didn't need a perfect ending. It had already made its point. Behind the scenes, both artists began investing in the next generation. Nicki supported up-and-coming artists through mentorship and collaborations, often spotlighting younger female rappers in her features. She continued to push for artistic ownership, reminding them not to sign away their freedom for fame. Cardi, meanwhile, became a symbol of empowerment for everyday women, showing that success didn't require perfection, only persistence. She spoke candidly about the challenges of motherhood, marriage, and mental health, breaking the silence on issues many celebrities avoided. Their influence stretched beyond music charts into culture itself. You could see it in fashion, where bold colors, wigs, and expressive aesthetics became mainstream. You could see it in social media, where women spoke their minds more freely. You could see it in language, humor, and even activism. The world had absorbed their energy, their unapologetic confidence, and made it part of the modern voice. What once was labeled as a feud had now evolved into a lesson, not just for fans, but for the entire entertainment industry. The Nicki and Cardi story had proven that competition could exist without destruction, that two women could be powerful without one needing to fall. It also revealed the dark side of celebrity culture, how media narratives and fan wars can distort reality, and how easily human moments can be turned into entertainment. For both Nicki and Cardi, that realization became freedom. They no longer chased validation or headlines. They created on their own terms. Nicki's later albums carried themes of reflection, motherhood, and maturity, blending her classic fire with newfound grace. Cardi's music, meanwhile, became sharper and more confident, a reflection of a woman who had learned to navigate fame with her own set of rules. They had both learned that silence could be more powerful than words. There was no need to address rumors, no need to revisit the past. Their music spoke for them, and their actions defined who they were. They had turned chaos into creation. As the next wave of artists rose, the impact of their journey became even clearer. Younger rappers spoke about unity, about supporting one another, and about breaking the old cycles of competition. The narrative had shifted, no longer, "Who's the best?" but "Who's next?" That change was part of Nicki and Cardi's legacy too. Looking back, it's hard not to see the irony. The explosive fight that once divided fans had actually united an entire generation of women under a new understanding of power. It had forced the world to talk about how women are treated in music, how fame magnifies conflict, and how strength can take many forms. It had changed the conversation, not just in hip-hop but in culture as a whole. Even now, when their names trend together, it's no longer about rivalry, it's about recognition. Recognition of how far they've come, how much they've endured, and how deeply they've influenced the world around them. Both Nicki Minaj and Cardi B stand as proof that evolution is possible, that even through misunderstanding, conflict, and chaos, growth can emerge. They showed that power doesn't come from perfection, but from persistence. That being a woman in control of her voice, her art, and her story is the most revolutionary act of all. In the grand timeline of music history, their feud will always be remembered, but not as a scandal. It will be remembered as a turning point, the moment when the world realized that female artists didn't need to fit into the roles society assigned them. They could be complex, contradictory, and completely themselves. And maybe that's what makes their story timeless. Because beyond the headlines, beyond the drama, beyond the flashing cameras and viral clips, the real story behind their explosive fight was never about hatred. It was about identity. It was about visibility. It was about two women daring to be great in a world that tried to limit them. Today, when Nicki Minaj walks onto a stage, she carries the weight of her legacy, a living legend who changed hip-hop forever. When Cardi B takes the mic, she brings the energy of every woman who's ever been told she couldn't. Together, even without collaboration, they've created something lasting, a cultural blueprint that will inspire artists for decades to come. Their rivalry may have started with tension, but it ended with transformation. And that's the real story. Not the feud, but the future it helped create. Because in the end, both Nicki and Cardi proved that you can be powerful, passionate, and proud, and still evolve. That your story can begin in chaos but end in clarity. That the path to greatness isn't always pretty, but it's always worth it. Their legacy is not the fight. It's the fire that came after.